Hello, back again for another live stream. Yes, we are going to talk about the Curse of Strahd. Every month I come back and we have another discussion about what you can do with your game with regard to the Curse of Strahd. Since it's quite a popular adventure, I would say that The Lost Mine of Phandelver's probably run more than any other adventure, and then after that I would say Curse of Strahd. And I would say at some point Dragon of Ice by a Peak will wind up hitting the sort of the top 3 adventures for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. But anyway, I'm just doing a quick sound check to make sure everything is working fine. I need to be fairly quick. Now, what I would say to those of you who are here, I will do a presentation today on the Megalith, and then I will open it up to questions and answers. So grab some food, make sure you some drink, get comfortable, and then we are going to get going because I have the Dungeon Master Round Table in about 2 hours from now, so I need to get organized very, very quickly and get this done and give you an opportunity to actually have a discussion or ask some questions if you want to. Hi Matt, how's it going? Okay, so now that everybody is here, or those who are interested are here, we'll discuss this topic and go from there. Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Weller, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Actually, the topic for today is nothing to do with the dog park. It's not Stonehenge. No, it's the megalith. The megalith in the Curse of Strahd. There is a set of stones. There's actually 4 stones, and they have a significance to the adventure that is discussed a little bit, but I know a lot of people want to do more with this, so I thought it would be a good idea to sort of cover that topic today. I would also like to make it clear to those of you who are watching that this is a Curse of Strahd Dungeon Master Guide. It is going to have spoilers. If you are a player and you're playing through this adventure, please don't hang around because you're in the wrong place for this. There is a player guide for the Curse of Strahd if you are interested, but if you're a Dungeon Master, you're in the right place, and I'll give you as many ideas as I can possibly come up with in the short time that we have. So, now that we've said that, let's get on with business, which is, let's talk about the megalith. What is the purpose of the standing stones at the foot of the old bone grinder? That is our question. Now, the adventure does actually discuss that topic a little bit already, and you'll probably find about 2 paragraphs on page 128 of the Curse of Strahd that sort of details what they have there for you. What I found when I was running the Curse of Strahd is that me as a dungeon master, I wanted more from it. I didn't feel like, for some strange reason, I felt like it had significance there, but it didn't have enough information to give me an idea of what to do with it. And then the players wanted the megalith to have something else going on. They suspected there was more to it than meets the eye. But you don't really get very much. You get a lot of background history, what's going on in terms of how it's being used. There's a little bit of discussion around that, but not a lot. But it never had the significance that the players wanted. It never had the significance that I wanted. A lot of the information in those two or three paragraphs, you never relate to the players. It's all for the dungeon master and nobody else. So I felt like that was sort of something that's missing. So now if you're the kind of person who looked at that section and thought, well, there should be more to it than that, I can totally understand, which is why I've come up with, I believe, about 8 different ideas. A lot of these ideas are drawn from the book, so there's at least 2 that are drawn directly from the book, and the rest are creations of my imagination and a little bit of research, you might say. Okay, so here are a few suggestions to fill in, and you should definitely adjust them and change them if you feel like you need to. So the first one, let's go over what we already know. The megalith are remains of 4 cities that used to dominate Barovia before it became Strahd's domain of dread. And that's why there's a statement around Twilight of 4 cities. Now this is something that Jeremy Crawford came up with and dropped in there for Dungeon Masters to play with. I'll explain more about that, but let's just go through the rest of it. Each of the 4 stones are carved with symbols relating to each city. its associated season of the year. So each city was related to summer, spring, autumn, and winter. For those of you who are kind of confused about that, I totally understand. And it was also, each of these 4 cities was supposed to be the residence of the first residence of an ancient god. Some of these gods have a big part to play in Barovia, and some of these gods may not. Now, the gods that are stated are the Mother Night and the Morning Lord, and that's all on page 128. So the first thing I would say to you is that I had a look on social media to find out what was going on. People had asked questions about that section, and what Chris Perkins had to say was that this was the creation of Jeremy Crawford, and that they had left it kind of open-ended with not as much information as you might want, deliberately so that dungeon masters could fill in the gaps, could do something with it. But they don't say that in the adventure. So if you thought there was something missing, you're right, there is. Will you ever get what Jeremy Crawford came up in his campaign? I don't think you will, because I think they've deliberately left that alone for more than a few different reasons, I suspect. But one I think is that one of the traditions of Dungeons and Dragons is to leave spaces in adventures to allow dungeon masters to practice filling in the gaps. The problem is that Wizards of the Coast or D&D 5e, they don't ever spell this out. Whereas in older versions of the game, they would actually leave a space and state this section is to be filled out by the dungeon master. But they don't do this in these printed books, unfortunately. Okay, there's a second reason that the megaliths exist. The megalith is a burial ground for the children's bones and teeth the hags cook into dream pastries. Now, the children's bones are never found, so no one realises what the hags are up to or doing, and it also allows the hags to worship the wicked archfey Kethlin of the crooked teeth. I think that's right. Kethlin. I think it is Kethlin. Now, that's already spelled out in the adventure. I'm also going to, because it only mentions teeth, I'm going to add in bones, which is why I've discussed bones. One of the things that when I was doing research, I was like, well, why do you have standing stones like this? And for those of you who know anything about Stonehenge, a lot of the ideas I have drawn from Stonehenge and then given them a Dungeons and Dragons feel to them. And one of the theories around Stonehenge is that it was used as a burial ground. Whether that was its intention initially or whether that became how it was being used later on is not really, it's not known, because there's a lot of mysteries around that. But I think that when Jeremy Crawford was creating the megalith, he was drawing very much from Stonehenge. And so therefore, you can certainly use a lot of the theories, myths that are related to Stonehenge and incorporate them. And I think he has latched on to 2 that he thought would sort of relate for his adventure. And so we've got burial ground and we've got standing stones related to some ancient civilizations. And, many different civilizations built Stonehenge and had added to it and changed it over the many, many years that passed. So there's a lot of research you can do on Stonehenge that will help you fill out this section, I think. Okay, so number 3. Now we're getting into the stuff that isn't really spelled out in the book. This is the newer stuff, okay? The megalith, number 3, the megalith acts as a portal to another world like the 9 hells, the abyss, the ethereal plane, or the far realm. Now, I selected the 9 hells because, like, the domain of dread is a place where bad things happen. The Dark Lords have got a dark purpose, but they've also got another purpose, which is to contain these individuals, Strahd being one in this case. So I thought the 9 hells would be a way of sort of, allowing travel to that world if you wanted to do that. The abyss, demons, probably doesn't make quite so much sense, but I thought I'd add it in there. The ethereal plane, now the reason I put in the ethereal plane as a portal to there is because the hags can travel from, the material plane to the ethereal plane. And really, to destroy the hags is very difficult. You'd have to really be able to take them out in one round before they get a chance to do anything, because then they can just pass from the material plane into the ethereal plane, and you can't touch them. And they just wait until you go to sleep, and then they drain your life, okay? Drain your hit points, and you lose your maximum hit points slowly over time, and there's nothing you can do about that. But if you were to leave the access point being a portal, and the megalith is that, and it allows them to go to the ethereal plane, they may be actually able to get hold of the hags and finally finish them off. Now, I never did this in my adventure because, frankly, I only came up with the idea a couple of days ago. Now, the other one I have added in is the Far Realm. Now, I added in the Far Realm because it's a dark place, it's a weird place, and I was also thinking that these standing stones would allow you to sort of engage in planar travel. If you have a Spelljammer campaign, that maybe that would work a lot more, but planar travel might be something you want to do a lot more, and having that access point being those stones would be kind of useful for anybody who wants to have a more dark and dingy dealing with, really, really nasty evil things, and nasty evil things exist in those places. So that's why I put that in as an idea. Here's another one. So number 4, the megalith or megaliths hide an invisible door back in time. So it's a door that you can use to travel back in time, so that mistakes can be fixed by anyone who knows the activation ritual. Now, who knows the activation ritual? That's up to you as a dungeon master to decide. I'm going to suggest it could be Strahd, it could be Madame Ava, it could be the hags. They might have to get it out of the hags. There's a couple of individuals that I think it makes sense to sort of allow that kind of information, and allow the players to find out how to use it. Now, who would use the door? The door might be used by Strahd himself if things don't go well, particularly if Irina is killed, or if Irina manages to escape his domain. He could turn back time to a point where she hasn't left and continue his plan to try to get her to come to him, so that he finally has control of her. Or it could be used, and I think this is the point I'm putting out there, is it could be used by the player characters. Now, why would you do that? If something happens in your campaign where the whole thing just sort of falls apart, and you don't really want to sort of rewind the clock in an odd way and just say, oh, we'll just say that didn't happen, or you didn't want the campaign to finish that way, then why not go with turning back time? That would give them an option to do that, particularly because they probably can't travel back in time at the level they are at currently. Because I think my group finished up at about level 10 or level 11 with this campaign, and you just won't be high enough level. You want to have access to the kind of spells you need to be able to change the events that have already occurred if things didn't turn out the way you needed them to turn out. So that gives them a way of doing that. Now, whether you as the Dungeon Master present this straight away, or as an option only if things sort of fall apart for you, it's up to you. You could introduce it at any point if you really wanted to. Okay. Number 5, this idea: the ancient granite stones are a druid circle that was once used to heal the sick and bring back the dead. So basically, if you had somebody who's dead, you could bring them back to life, and this would be a way of doing that. But of course, you would have to know how it works. You probably need to have a druid. You need to have some information and understanding about how to go about doing that. So there's lots of things at play, but I thought I would put it there. Now, yes, a lot of these ideas have been drawn very much from a lot of the theories from the Stonehenge. I'm going to say it right now. I've pulled a lot of ideas from Stonehenge, and this is one. Okay, this is one of the theories, is that it was used as a place of healing. Now, what you can do is twist this a little bit more. What you could also include is that, say, dead creatures could be put into the megalith circle, and they could be transformed into the undead. So you wind up with the ability to create undead creatures. Now, who would do something like this? Well, I think the hags would probably have a go at doing that. I think Strahd would absolutely consider that an option. And there might be some players who consider that an option as well. So I'm leaving it there, you know. They figure out how to use the circle, they can heal the sick, bring people back to life, you know, not reincarnated, but just bring, you know, as if you were using the raise dead spell, I suppose. And then the other option is bringing people or individuals or creatures back to life, but they become undead creatures, which means they're evil. They're going to be villains. They're going to be things that the players don't want to hang around. But you can change all of that, okay? I have had my players wind up coming back to life, and they came back as undead creatures. So there's another way of doing that. You don't necessarily have to bring them back as a normal living creature in Barovia. They could wind up coming back as an undead creature. And that doesn't have to be permanent. Nothing's permanent in a fantasy world. Okay, right, let's move on to the next idea. A blue stone communication circle. Now, why have I said blue stone? Because there has been discussion that some of the stones that are, or blue stones that are in the Stonehenge, have the ability to acoustic abilities and the ability to help sound travel. And so I've picked that one. So the blue stones activate as a sort of like a communication circle for talking with the Dark Lords. So if you want to talk to the different Dark Lords that exist, that imprison Strahd, you could do so through this. I have added in a little bit more for you. So Strahd hasn't used the megalith for hundreds of years and is the only one that knows how to use it, as well as being the only individual the Dark Lords respond to for most of the time. Which means the circle will really never get used by anybody but Strahd, but you could have the players come across Strahd using the circle to communicate with the Dark Lords. The other option is you ignore all of that and decide that there is the opportunity for them to find out how this communication circle works, so they can communicate with the Dark Lords themselves without Strahd being involved. Now, whether that means they have to get it out of Strahd, steal a book or a journal from his castle, might be a bit difficult. Maybe they can get it out of Madame Ava. Maybe the hags have that information about how to activate the circle. And then, of course, whether the Dark Lords communicate with your player characters is totally up to you. Now, why am I using this? I think the reason I picked that wasn't just the theories behind Stonehenge, but if you guys remember the final scene in Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he's pursuing the Ark, trying to get the Ark. The Ark has the 10 Commandments in it. It's apparently it keeps going on about it being a way to communicate with God. And so I thought, well, let's take that concept and say, instead of it being God, we're communicating with the Dark Lords. There's always really bad consequences with talking with gods, right? And you could do something very similar yourself. I'm not suggesting that you wind up with all the characters getting wiped out and melting into puddles of goo, but just as a suggestion, that's part of the reason why it popped up into my mind, was those two ideas and trying to use it as a communication centre in some way. Okay, idea number 7. This is a magical rock teleportation circle linked to other circles in Barovia that the Dungeon Master can create. Now, there aren't any circles that I specifically remember in the Curse of Strahd that you could sort of say, okay, they're already there, we could just link this megalith to those circles and you can just move, fast travel from one to the other. Barovia is quite a small place as it is, okay? So it's not like it would be difficult to get from one end of Barovia to the other. It's not. It actually doesn't take very long at all. It's a very small, isolated location. But it's there as an option if you wanted. I think probably what's probably more useful to you in terms of transporting yourself somewhere else, and you might have noticed there's a lot of portal ideas in what I'm presenting today. You could also use the megalith as a way of the player's characters travelling to another domain of dread. Now, that might be a domain of dread that you have created by using some of the rules around Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Maybe you created it from some of the older versions of Ravenloft, some of the supplements that were put out. Maybe it's an existing domain of dread. Maybe there's a way of kind of picking where you specifically want to go. You just need to know the right coding, the right ritual, the right spell, whatever it is, to allow you to travel from Barovia, this particular domain of dread, Strahd's domain of dread, and travel to a different domain of dread. Now, the reason for doing that, and the reason I'm suggesting it, is I suspect there's quite a few people who would like to create a campaign around traveling to the different domains of dread. And so this would allow you, that would be probably the best way that I can think of to make it easy. Now, you could say, well, yes, but also, Fred, there is the mist. The mist is the border to the domains of dread. So that it makes sense that traveling through the mist would allow you to travel to a different domain of dread. Yes, I would agree. You're probably right. But I'm also suggesting that the megalith is there and you could use it as if it's a portal or a door to a different domain of dread. Just more options. That's all it is. Okay. The last idea, for those of you who have probably already figured out where I'm going with this, but the last idea is that the megalith could be a landing zone for hot air balloons, flying sailing ships, and spelljammer ships. For those of you who want to run like a spelljammer, travel to different worlds sort of campaign, this might be the way to do it. Because, as we know, it's obvious to everybody that aliens and space travelers love a few big rocks to land on or park on. So you could use it as a landing site. I'm not saying necessarily flying saucers. Okay, I know you're running a fantasy adventure. I know it's supposed to be horror. So here's an option: hot air balloons, flying sailing ships, and spelljammer ships. Landing site. Yes, again, another theory drawn from Stonehenge. I have to thank everybody who created some very, very entertaining and interesting theories. Who knows whether they're right, but it doesn't matter. It makes for an interesting story. Anyway, okay, so that's pretty much everything I have for you today with regard to the megalith. I know that's very short, which actually means I have more time to actually discuss stuff with you. Good news, isn't it? So I hope that you found this interesting, and if you did, great news. Now, if you want more videos on the Curse of Strahd, I have live streams on the Curse of Strahd. I have edited versions or edited videos on the Curse of Strahd for Dungeon Masters and players. There's quite a lot of material there now. You're welcome to go and check those out. They're in a playlist. There's at least 2 playlists that include them, and you're welcome to go and check out those videos if you want. Otherwise, if you're more interested in, say, more generic or general information around Dungeons and Dragons or 5e, I have hundreds of videos for players and Dungeon Masters that could probably help you. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing video content like this, you can through Patreon. The Amazon affiliate links down in the description, the merchandise shelf underneath my videos, or just keep watching my videos. That's fine too. Make sure to do all the usual YouTube things. You know what I mean. Like share, like, subscribe, hit the bell button when I go live every week. So hitting the bell button doesn't necessarily guarantee that you will actually find the live stream every week. But I do put it up on my community tab. So that means that there's a good chance it will pop up on your feed and you will actually see that I have a live stream every week at a specific time. So that might help. Otherwise, I do have videos that I edit. I usually have between 1 or 2 that I release every week as well. And that's everything I have for you. So, hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. And we're back. Right, so it's a very small room today. It's a very quiet room. I'm going to put my glasses on and see if that helps me. It might. Yes, it has. That's good news. Okay, all right, so let's have a discussion. This is an opportunity. You can ask questions about anything. Okay, if you're here, you can ask questions, give feedback. It doesn't have to be related to the Curse of Strahd. I just try to make sure that every week there is the opportunity to do that sort of thing. I see somebody's already put a question in there, but I'll just do the usual hashtag question thing. Not that I think it's going to make any difference, but to at least indicate that I am answering questions and not just hanging around. doing nothing in particular. So I've got that hashtag question, please. Okay, right, we've got that. Okay, so let's go through here. Just make sure I'm in the right place. I've got at least more than half an hour before I need to sort of jump off, which is good. Much more than I usually have. Jasper. So Jasper, it's winter. I'm not enjoying winter. Winter has proven to be, frankly, cold. It's not like snow cold, but it's cold enough that I have to work indoors and outdoors, and so there's a whole lot of different buildings, and I have to travel from one to the other, and so you go from where the building's heated, then you go out to the cold, and it's a bit of a shock to the system. So I'm not very fond of that, and we're all bundled up in multiple layers, but it doesn't really seem to do very much. So no, I'm not enjoying winter. I don't like winter very much. Anyway, I'll be looking forward to when summer arrives. Canal, how's it going? Now I'm Musicasis. Canal, Musicasis. I hope I got your name right. Congratulations for your channel and help for DMs, Fred. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad it was helpful to you. If I'm doing stuff that you find helpful, that's good news. Right, Matt's got a question here. Question: what about the black stone megalith outside of the Tomb of Horrors? There are 5 these black stones at different these black stones at different adventuring locations. You know, it's been a while since I've looked through the Tomb of Horrors. So for the life of me, I don't actually remember there being black stones outside it. But yeah, I suppose you could do something like that. I mean, standing stones always seem to have some sort of significance, and people always try to attach more significance to a standing stone than really was intended. So you can pretty much do anything with it you like. So yeah, you could. You could use it as a way of traveling from one adventure location to another. It makes it a bit easier to sort of fast travel things. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I will answer questions about anything, preferably about Dungeons and Dragons in some sense. Doesn't have to be Curse of Strahd. I don't know if that's necessarily answered your question, Matt. I think if anything, you've actually answered your question, Matt, in the question. Okay. Jasper's Pearl question. I have to DM a huge dungeon next week. Oh no, like enormous. Should I split into 2 sessions? Mate, if you have a huge dungeon to run next week, and it's anything like Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and some of those maps are just so big, there's no way you can calculate how long it will take to get through. So I would make life easier for yourself, Jasper, and not set a time limit. What happens when you run through a dungeon or a mega dungeon is, because mega dungeons are structured in such a way that they focus on exploration and making sure you find everything, making sure you get the secret doors, the keys to allow different access, finding all the treasures and magic items, and they will be hidden quite often in places that the players don't necessarily find obvious. So you have to go through a dungeon with a fine tooth comb to find everything. If it's that kind of dungeon, which it probably is, then that means you can't put a time limit. I found my players struggled to get through more than 2 or 3 rooms when they were playing through, and we would play for about 3 hours. I would say there's about half an hour of just mucking around and goofing off, okay? But that's definitely something to consider. And then once they started to get into the rhythm and got used to working their way through a mega dungeon or a really large dungeon, what they would do is they would realize they needed to have sort of like a process, and they got into the rhythm, and so they could push through, and they might get through 5 to 8 rooms before they had to stop. Now, a lot of rooms in a mega dungeon are actually quite empty. There's just like nothing there. So they chew up a bit of time, and that's done there. It's done deliberately. It has a purpose behind it. ultimately, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of the majority of the time is not necessarily taken up by fighting monsters. It's going to be taken up by talking with NPCs, investigating clues, coming up with plans, but very much exploration. I would say probably the biggest element, depending on how you structure your D&D campaign and what you're running through, exploration is the biggest element out of the whole thing. So, particularly with a dungeon. So yeah, I wouldn't give yourself a time frame on that. Okay, Swampy Steers, I think it is. Trying my simplest storyline for 8-year-olds and 13-year-old kids. Yeah, okay, all right, fair enough. Now, Swampy, I've actually got a video, I don't know when it's coming out. I've got a video coming out on running Dungeons and Dragons 5e for kids that Sadie Rogers helped me put that together. And I've started to edit the stuff together. It's taking me a long time. There's just so much to get through. And one of the things we did discuss is what types of adventures do kids like. And I'm going to tell you now, she made it really clear that she said, look, Lost Mine of Phandelver is great, and you can break the Lost Mine of Phandelver apart, and there's nothing too sort of horrendous in there, so it's not going to sort of be a problem for younger kids, particularly since you've got an 8-year-old there, although the 8-year-olds seem to be pretty much all right. But if you're worried about those sorts of things, Lost Mine of Phandelver is fine. She also did mention Storm King's Thunder, the small side quests, not the whole campaign, but the side quests. You can build around them, and there's so many of them, and they do a lot of different things. But what she did say is that she found ultimately that it was easier to just come up and build a homebrew adventure or campaign. So if you're doing that and you're making it nice and simple, that's one of the things she said, is keep it simple. The kids will actually add the complexity. You don't have to worry about being a natural born novel or game designer. They'll do most of it for you. Okay? So that's what I would say. Simple storylines usually work best, particularly when you're dealing with homebrew, because you don't know how long it's going to survive. Okay. Renee. Hello, Renee. I have a question, but I will wait for a bit. That's fine, Renee. Just don't leave it till after 11. So do it before 11 a.m. for me, which is about 26 minutes from now. Okay. For you, I don't know where it is in the world, but right now it's 10:35, so you've got about 26 minutes. Okay. Nate. Hello, Nate. How's it going? Hey, thanks for the awesome videos. You're welcome. Your Curse of Strahd videos have been a great help. I'm glad they have. Let's not forget Steve over at Lunch Break Hero. He makes a lot of videos on the Curse of Strahd. I think I would say that Steve has probably made his whole channel about the Curse of Strahd. And he's done very well doing that. And he's got a lot of supplements that he publishes that you can pick up as well that sort of can help. I try very hard not to go over what Steve discusses. I try to do something he hasn't discussed. So I do keep an eye on his channel and try to give you something that's outside of what he's already talked about. Yeah. Thank you, by the way, Nate. Okay, Renee, question. Magic the Gathering is doing a crossover with D&D, and I only something R. Okay. And I only really playing D&D set in the Magic the Gathering universe. Characters that I'm not familiar with are being shown shown as new cards. Okay. Who is Dritz Dorden? Okay, all right. So Dritz is a dark elf ranger. Usually carries two blades. So he's classified as being a 2-weapon fighter. There's a lot of books and novels written by Salvatore You'll find his books all over the official Dungeons and Dragons website. You'll find that he releases a book quite often, and Jasper's just pointed out where he comes from. So that's a very, very famous character from Dungeons and Dragons, a much more modern Dungeons and Dragons character than maybe some of the other ones. Bruenor is also from the same world, okay? You're also excited for a crossover? I think it was a no-brainer. I was actually talking with, who was I talking with about Magic the Gathering crossing over with Dungeons and Dragons? I think, I know it was AJ Pickett. We were talking about the crossover, and we were also, I was talking with Dungeon Dad, Josiah. I talked briefly. We were talking about how those crossovers are becoming more and more common, and I think we're going to see more of them. And they do introduce to the game completely new worlds and ideas for Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, most of the, to be fair, just like Dungeons and Dragons settings, a lot of those worlds and ideas and characters that are being brought over are ripped from existing mythology and legend or somebody else's culture. So we're going to see more of them coming in. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that actually just means that we're going to get more. I still think a lot of people are going to want the classics as well. You can't just pump out Magic the Gathering and think that people are going to be happy. Most of the Magic the Gathering books have not done well sales-wise compared to other book products that they've put out. I don't think the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica did as well as they probably had hoped, but they've put it out. They've got all that artwork that's already done that they can utilize for those books, which is kind of very helpful, because Magic the Gathering has massive amounts of art. I use a lot of their art in my thumbnails because I know that Wizards of the Coast won't get upset because I'm promoting their product essentially. You know, Wizards of the Coast owns Dungeons and Dragons, and you know, Magic the Gathering was based off Dungeons and Dragons. So it's all going to wind up being connected into one. And we were all talking about the fact that the lore, you know, the people who look after the lore for Dungeons and Dragons, there's two different camps for lore. There's the Dungeons and Dragons team, and then there's the Magic the Gathering team. And I think they're going to try to bring them completely together and merge them at some point. I think that's, I think AJ is quite correct. That's going to happen at some point. So yeah, I think the crossovers are fine. I don't think they're doing as well as a lot of people had hoped at Wizards of the Coast. I thought the Mythic Odysseys of Theros was a very good book, and I liked the setting because it's very much taken stuff from Greek mythology, and I think there's a lot to be said for those settings. There's another one as well, which I won't mention, that I would like to see them do, which they have pretty much just pulled from somebody else's culture. You can see it. And for those of you who are, some of you will know about Magic the Gathering, but it's got a very Egyptian feel. Okay, so I can see that coming at some point. But then, you know, Wizard of the Coast isn't new to this. It's not like they're doing something new that hasn't been done before. Because Gary used to do the same thing. Gary Gygax, TSR, they used to duplicate existing mythology, legend, and settings that existed in literature and in just our cultures. So it's going to happen. All right, so moving through here, make sure I get everything covered today. Thank you for the jumping in there, Jasper. That's very helpful. For kids, a one-shot adventure, they get bored quickly. Yeah, Matt, I think you're right. I think this is why Sadie Rogers said to me that the short side quests were a good option, because they can latch onto a small short story fairly well. It's just if you try to build too much too quickly. And you're welcome, Nate. Swampy, you ever play Morgan's Fort? No, I haven't. I don't know what that is. Sorry. Or I Spy Peak. Yes, I have. So I've run through the Dragon of I Spy Peak. This is why I have a Dungeon Master video series on that. We will go back and talk about the Dragon of Ice biopic, and probably also a little bit about the Lost Mine of Phandelver in about 2 weeks. But next week is going to be, I'm reviewing the Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. I just needed time to go through the book and get a really good grasp of what's going on. So, yeah. So the next week live stream will be Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. We're going to discuss that. I know a lot of people have been asking me, will I be doing OSR content, old school Renaissance content, or just old school adventures? And yes, I think that's very likely. I don't know when. I think it's much more likely that I'm probably going to discuss, if I discuss anything that's old school, it's going to be the original Ravenloft and the Isle of Dread. I think also it's very likely you might see also Beyond the Magic Mirror and a couple of others. But I don't know in what order, I don't know when, but they will eventually show up in the live stream feeds at some point. Anyway, let's keep working my way through here. Slick, Nasty, how's it going? My party just finished the Death House. Okay, my players actually became very attached to Rose and Thorn. Okay, really? Okay, and this is sounding interesting. I'm curious if you think there's any spots in the story for a quick return from them in some form. Yes, Slick Nasty, I do. And here's the thing. I think there's definitely a way of bringing them back into the story. Their ghosts are very much tied to that house, and the house can never really be destroyed, as you know. It's the Death House. That house is just, they burn it down, it comes back. So probably one of the easiest ways to free those children is not just to bury their body, their bones, find their bones and bury them in the right place. So that, the story does talk about doing that. But there are some features in the Amber Temple, okay, where the Lich is. And there's a whole lot of dark gifts. And some of those dark gifts allow you to raise somebody from the dead. And I would suggest that the players, if they get there, could use Raise the Dead to bring those children back to life so they can leave the house. Now, by then, those characters will be so much more powerful and they'll be able to barge their way through that house and deal with it pretty effectively. At low level, that house is brutal. But higher level, they'll have the tools and resources at their disposal to deal with that monstrous house that it is. And it's a monster, it really is. And they could bring them back into the story at that point. I suspect that your players want to free those children in some way. So there's something you want to consider. You could do it that way. If they have the ability to bring somebody back to life through other means, then by all means you could probably do it that way. I don't know that necessarily bringing them back, their ghosts back into the story later on is going to work. But also too, even if they've been through the house and they didn't find the bones of the children, you could hint through Madame Ava, okay, that that would be the way to go. Maybe she can have a premonition about those children and what needs to be done if they haven't figured out how to get the bones back into the right place or how to free those children completely. And that's your job as a dungeon master, to drop the right hints and clues to allow them to steer them in the right direction. Does that help, Slick Nasty? Does that help? I think there are ways of doing that. And Madame Ava, the Amber Temple, Resurrection Magic, they can even go back into the house if they didn't complete everything and give it another go. Do you know what I mean? It's not like they can, we got so far and now we're finished. You could absolutely take your players back, or they could decide to go back. And I think that's the more important aspect, is getting them to make that decision. Okay, all right, so Renee. Hello, Renee. I brought the Ravnica book and loved it, based on a whole adventure of it with my friends, and I too love the Magic the Gathering art. Well, that's good. I think the next campaign I ever run will be Theros for me. Ravnica was too much of a city, and I'm just not a city person. It's just me. But yeah, okay. Right now, what I got here, Nate? Question. You had mentioned another YouTube channel to check out for Curse of Strahd. I think I missed who you said. Okay, so Steve runs Lunch Break Hero. Okay, Lunch Break Hero. That's the channel you want to go and check out. He does a lot of stuff on the Curse of Strahd. Normally, he's trying to fix something. Normally, that's what he's trying to do. Thank you for subbing, by the way, Swampy. Okay. I believe right now Amazon is doing 3 books for the price of 2, or something like that right now. So you buy 3 Dungeons and Dragons books, these specific ones, and then you get them for the price of 2, something like that. Oh man, I'm going to struggle with this. I can see today it's going to be very, very difficult when I'm doing that round table. Will I make it to the end of the stream? What do you got here, Renee? You're talking about the plane of... yes, I am. That's right. Exactly. But yes, it's very much taken Egyptian mythology, legend, and culture and turned it into an IP. So actually, yeah, that's something that kind of still annoys me, is Wizards of the Coast, TSR, taking things that are mythology and legend and somebody else's culture and trying to stamp an IP over it, making a few adjustments to make it look like a little bit different, but then deciding they want to claim it as their property. I think that's actually it's kind of rude and a bit of, I would say, kind of theft too. I mean, look, let's get real. TSR just stole so many things over the years, just here, there, wound up in court a lot of times. Then you've got Wizards of the Coast has carried on that tradition. I have the book, but not sure where to start. Okay. The Progeny 58. How's it going? I have a party that's new to D&D. Should I have them start in Barovia or in Vallaki after Death House? Okay, so first off, that's not my decision. That's your decision based on what you know about your players. You can start them off in the Forgotten Realms. You can start them off and then move into through the mists using the adventure hooks. I've got a video on the adventure hooks and how to get them from one world to another. So that's not hard. Do you want to start them straight off with the Death House and then move into Barovia? Yes, you could do that. You know, they're walking along in the mist, Death House, they play through that, or they don't play through that if they decide not to go in, and they wind up in Barovia. You could do that. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. You could start them off in Kresk, on the other side of the map. You could start them off in Vallaki and Barovia, straight from there. It really depends on you. There's no right way to do this. Do you know what I mean? It's just what's going to work for you and your group. And if you think that there's a particular way you would like to do it, then that's the way you do it. And if you're wrong, don't worry about it. Just move on. Okay? These things happen. I'm not going to be able to give you a better idea of how to do things just because, you know, it doesn't work that way. You know, telling stories just doesn't work that way. You think about what's going to be the more interesting story and what will appeal to the people at your table and what appeals to you. Okay. Okay, what do we got here? JP, right. So JP is one of my players. TSR's original Dark Sun campaign, 2nd Ed edition. The problem is that everybody... I found that I like Dark Sun as a campaign setting. But I've always found that players don't like Dark Sun as a campaign setting. So just because I like it doesn't mean anybody else does. So I don't know about that. Even though I do like Dark Sun, I just don't know that it's going to have enough of. I just don't know if it's that helpful. Anyway, but that depends, unless of course I have a group of players who really want a deadly, dangerous world where survival is difficult and they have to scrounge for water and food and resources, and magic is not really a thing. Or if you do use magic, it has horrible consequences. Okay. Slick Nasty, absolutely, thank you. Your videos have been immensely helpful. Okay, no, good. Glad that was helpful. You're welcome, Nate. The Progeny 58. I have a party that's new to D&D. Should I have them start in... I already can't cover that, sorry. Moving on. Is Mythic Odysseys of Theros going to be our new campaign? Well, look, JP, I don't think I'll be running the next campaign. I think I'll be trying to get somebody else to run the next campaign after we've finished. And I know Simon's eager to do something. And it's better to let somebody scratch that itch when they want to scratch that itch. Then it just means that I will focus a little bit more on videos around playing Dungeons and Dragons rather than dungeon mastering. You probably wind up with a lot of videos on how to use spells, since I tend to play spellcasters. Okay. Moving through. Yep. My Fargo. I don't know about My Fargo. I honestly, I don't know about My Fargo. I have no idea. Jasper, question. Have you played Icewind Dale yet? No. And I hear it's super tough and noobs shouldn't play it or run it. Your thoughts? Okay, so I haven't... Look, so Jasper, I will talk about Icewind Dale and Rime of the Frost Maiden. But from what I've seen so far of the book, concerns me. Because I think the themes behind it really require somebody who's very invested in horror, who has a group that can really trust everybody. You know, the trust between players and dungeon masters has to be quite high. I think that it is probably even more difficult to run in terms of a horror story than the Curse of Strahd. And I'll tell you, the Curse of Strahd is a tough adventure to get your players through. It really is. It really does test you and your players. Structurally, I think it's unsound. But I can't dispute the kinds of things that are in there that really do sort of reek of horror. They really do reek of horror. So I'll get there. And yes, I believe it would be extremely tough on new players, and dungeon masters. And I do believe it probably would be extremely tough to get through. But yeah, I think that's all I can say on Icewind Dale at this present time. We will get there. The only reason I haven't really done it is because I thought there were other books that were more important. And also too, Icewind Dale is no longer available for purchase on Amazon. It's out of print, or they're out of stock. So I just stopped there and I'm like, nah, okay, I'll come back to it when they get it back in stock. And this is probably around the pandemic stuff, you know, and supply and demand. And the supply of books is probably just not high enough right now. Everybody is at home playing Dungeons and Dragons and video games. Yeah. Okay, Swampy. I make up it as I like. I am third grade. Third grade? Okay. All right, I got it. Yep, you do your own thing. Do your own thing. Okay. Slick Nasty. What's your thoughts on having Strahd try and turn one of the players against the rest? I'm kind of thinking of Darth Sidious, Anakin Skywalker type of dynamic. Okay, so I've had that happen, but it wasn't the player. It wasn't the player who was turning on the party. I had two characters who I convinced had been infected with were vampirism and that they were vampire spawn and they had all these special abilities. It was a nasty trick on my part, and I convinced them pretty well. And then they discovered later on that they weren't actually turning into vampires, although they were concerned at some point that maybe they would. But then I did have another character who did get infected with lycanthropy, and it was becoming a werewolf. And they would get, I would make them make rolls to see if they could control their character. And the day did come when that character finally turned on the party. And for some of the players, they found it really interesting, even though many of their characters got decimated. I mean, half the party just got trounced or killed from that encounter. And the player was having to play against the party while I had my monsters and creatures playing against the party. So they just couldn't deal with it. And that character was so powerful. Now here's the consequence of doing something like that, which I think relates to your question about having a character in there that has got a sort of a turning on the party and not necessarily being allied with them. I had some of the players who thought it was very interesting and liked it, but were adamant that they would never have that werewolf player character back in the party, and so they could not play that character anymore while they were a werewolf. And of course the werewolf character ran away for a little while and they had to play a different character. And eventually that character came back, but they had to get rid of the werewolf curse on that character, because those players who were willing to play with that character in the party would not do so if they still had the werewolf features. If they were still transforming into a werewolf, or were a werewolf, or becoming a werewolf, they will have no bar with it, which I totally understand. Then I had a couple of players, particularly one, but a couple of players who were so angry with that player because they thought that they were deliberately sabotaging the group. And they didn't realize that I was enforcing on that player to play their character as if they were falling to the dark side, that they were losing control of their character. And that did undermine my group a little bit. So unless you have people who can deal with that, who've known each other for years, and you're not dealing with new players, I don't think it's necessarily going to work out well. I would never attempt to do something like this unless you have made it clear what you're doing. I think that if you hide it, particularly that nature, I kind of feel bad because I was the one who put in the mechanics for that werewolf transformation and that character once he was infected. So I would say to you, be very, very careful about doing something like that, and probably not necessarily the best thing to do. I think it is much better to make it clear to the players that this player character could lose control of their character at some point. If it's quite clear in the rolling dice, or there's something that you've put in place to make it clear that they might need to either eject that character from their party, or they might need to cure that individual, or they might need to remove their curse, or whatever it is, I think that's probably going to work out better for you. Yeah. It always sounds better when it comes from a book or a movie, but when you do it in a role-play game, it's just not the same. Right, I better get finished up pretty quickly, so let's keep going. Nate, I was a huge fan of Planescape. Yes, I'm hoping the rumours are correct that they are working on a revamp. I think it's more likely Dragonlance and Spelljammer rather than Planescape, but who knows? It's been a bit hard to figure that out. You're welcome, Renee. I'm glad it was helpful. Jasper, you are welcome. Adele Patel. Adele Patel. Hopefully I got that name right. Don't have a question, just wanted to say your channel is great and looking forward to more content. You are welcome. I have more than a year's worth of content waiting to be released. I just can't keep up anymore, unfortunately. Trying to publish it is the biggest problem. I'm trying to get on top of the editing, but it's been difficult. Swampy, what are you playing as? I'm not sure what question that's related to. Anyway, sorry I can't answer that question. I don't know what that is. Moving on. Punisher 426. One of the treasures in the crypts of the castle. How do I get them down there? How do you get them down there? Your players, well, they just need to find the right route through the castle to get down into the crypt. The access point to the crypt is actually fairly simple. It's not that complicated. I know at some point I need to talk about the map, because I know the Ravenloft castle map confuses people and how to sort of negotiate it a bit. I just don't know how to communicate that at this point in a way that would be easy for people to understand. When I figure out a good solution to that, then I'll do it. Okay? The Progeny 58, what do you got here? To add suspense, I do death saving throws behind Dungeon Master screen. 2 players hate losing agency of their characters. Is this something I should stop doing? Well, if you've got players who don't like it, then maybe that's part of your problem. But if they're not going to leave your table, then maybe you don't need to worry about it. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to tell you you shouldn't roll the death saving throws yourself behind the Dungeon Master screen. I'm not going to do that. I think a lot of players assume that they have total control over their character and all the dice rolling that they do. And this is something that is actually quite a new and modern concept. A lot of dice rolling by Dungeon Masters and players, quite often the Dungeon Master would do most of the rolling and the players would actually do very little of the rolling. So it's a different way of playing the game. You just have to see if that's going to work for your group. If your group doesn't like it and they want to leave and you're worried about losing them, then maybe you change it. But then again, the day is going to come when I will do a video on turning death saving throws into a variant rule and removing it from Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Seriously, the day will come and I'll do a video and I will talk about turning death saving throws into a variant rule so you don't use them anymore. Now, would that be popular with players? Probably not necessarily. I think some players would be fine with it and other players would not. But we're going to go there eventually because, I think we do need to actually discuss that at some point. Matt, thanks, Fred. Didn't know Spelljammer was one of the books rumoured to come out. Yeah, no, I think it'll be next year. We thought it was going to be this year, but I think it's more likely next year. Slick Nasty, do you do anything extra unique with the dream pastries? Oh. Every time they took the dream pastries, I had them do something different. Will I do a video on dream pastries? Yes, I will. I can't answer that question right this very second because it'd take too long. So, one of the things I did discover is that my players became addicted to dream pastries because I'd keep coming up with something slightly different and they would get confused and like, well, hang on, let's eat another one and see what happens. And then something else would happen. So they were assuming that if they took the dream pastries, only one sort of thing would happen. And so therefore it was a nasty way of me tricking them into eating more of them, which I know sounds terrible, okay? But one of the things you'll find as a dungeon master is to keep your players on their toes and surprised. You have to keep morphing and changing what you're doing. Otherwise, they get used to how you do things. I've got a player already who knows how I do stuff. And so I've got to constantly try to figure out what would I normally do and what could I do that would throw them off balance a little bit. And my characters in the current campaign are level 13, so they're almost gods. It won't be too much longer before combat will be nothing to them. And I will have to break all the rules to actually make things interesting in terms of combat. But then when it comes to actually solving problems and exploration, I mean, they've got arcane eye. They can just scope out everything from a distance. So, you know, don't worry about traps. Don't worry about threats. We'll just check it out from a distance and we know everything's there. Okay, now we know what to do. We're all good. And this is what happens when you start playing at higher levels. So yeah, we'll talk about dream pastries in the future. Right, I better get going. I'm supposed to be meeting with Trevor from No Fun Allowed, Ryan from Roll for Initiative, and DM Scotty from the DM's Craft today. So I better make sure I'm ready for them. And hello, Fire Lord Singer. It's been a while. Just read Vampire in the Mist, and the Megaliths play a role in the book. It's very interesting for sure. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't realise that. All right, Vampire in the Mist. Okay, cool. So for those of you who are unaware, check out Vampire in the Mist and see what the Megaliths are all about in that book. That might help you along. Cool, excellent. Thank you for that. Very useful. So thank you to everybody who showed up today. Thank you to my patrons. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.